Welcome, my dear friends. It is so good to see you. I'm Stephen Clements, a writer, a gamer, and an enjoyer of big brain activities in general. On this channel, I perform dramatic readings of my stories, I provide role-playing game reviews, and I get to interview interesting people. In this episode, we're going to take a look at an adventure module for Vampire the Dark Ages, Fountains of Bright Crimson, written by Ree Soesbee, published in 1999. This adventure was released to support the city setting book Jerusalem by Night and intended for entry-level characters. Unlike the Dungeons & Dragons adventures we've talked about, there was no mention of the number of players this adventure was designed for, which may not be unusual given Vampire's heavier emphasis on role-playing over focusing on combat. Now let's see how this adventure sells itself. In 1099, a city drowned in blood. A lunatic screams at midnight by a well whose waters have gone red with blood. But whose blood is it, and why does a humble shepherd gather each precious drop? Why do the tunnels that even the Nosferatu fear to explore now echo with inhuman footsteps and howls? And what are the plans of the mad brother Bernardus, who swears that the hand of the infernal is upon Jerusalem? All the seeds sown in 1099 and watered by the weeks of blood have finally begun to bear their unholy fruit. In 1197, the city's fountains flow crimson. Fountains of Bright Crimson is a standalone story for your Vampire the Dark Ages chronicle, revealing one of the oldest and most terrifying secrets of dark medieval Jerusalem. This book can be used either by itself or in conjunction with Jerusalem by Night. But be warned, once the truth behind the weeks of blood is revealed, the Canaanites of Jerusalem will never trust the ground beneath their feet again. Fountains of Bright Crimson includes a full-length standalone story for your Vampire the Dark Ages chronicle, suggestions for using this book either as part of an extended chronicle or on its own, the details of the Holy City's most earth-shattering Canaanite mystery, and more. Before I get into the module itself and my thoughts on it, and as someone who has both played and ran this adventure several times, believe me, I have thoughts. I must warn you, there will be spoilers. Spoilers so rich and deep that you could sink your fangs in there and drink it dry. Now that I've morally absolved myself for ruining a decades-old adventure module for you, here's my deep and dirty review. If you're a gamer who doesn't like ham-fisted railroad adventures, you're going to love my bitching on this one. An overarching problem this module has is that the way the writer talks to the game's storyteller destroys the suspension of disbelief, as she tries to beat the storyteller and players with an iron rod to keep them on the railroad, and no options exist except for the ones she provides. And there are plot-armored NPCs and impossible leaps of logic abounding here. But I don't hate this module, because it has some great ideas and ambitions. Incredibly interesting vampire lore elements that make it worth reading and playing through. So it is worth salvaging, but believe me, it is a salvage job. The module starts off well enough in the introduction, describing as it does a dark medieval Jerusalem, racked with religious factions at each other's throats, the air being rife with political tensions between the fading Crusader kingdoms and the rising power of Saladin's Egypt. The flavor text paints the image of the holy city as a tinderbox, just living in dread of the first spark to catch. It even speaks of a hellish problem of the first water? I have no idea what that means, but boy does it sound dramatic. Editors are your friend, but even they aren't perfect. This section of the book goes on to provide a full, succinct, and exciting overview of how to run this adventure, the main plot points, and key characters involved. But believe me, the crap starts flowing in Act 1. I have a huge problem with the opening conceit of the adventure. The module assumes the coterie, which is what Vampire calls its group of players, a coterie, either answers a call for help from a broke nobody across the sea from where the coterie's from, probably somewhere in Europe, or they are for some reason in the area and decide to see what this broke nobody wants. That broke nobody promises land, title, and wealth, and the writer makes it clear that he obviously won't be able to deliver on any of it, yet the players are expected to go along with it. And in my experience, players are legendarily combative and stubborn when it comes to going along with what NPCs ask them to do. So why on earth would the writer think this was a good story hook? An entire group of vampires willing to undergo an across land, across sea, and into a combat zone journey that's both incredibly expensive and dangerous to answer the call of some broke nobody. Unless the players are willing to take the bait for the sake of the game, the chances they will nope out and skip the adventure are pretty high. Since Vampire so heavily emphasizes role-playing, ask yourself the question, would you agree to risk your life for some ugly, poor, crazy hobo's quest? This is where the railroad of the adventure starts, and it's not even a good railroad. I have no problem with railroad adventures in general and think they can be amazing ways to hook players and build up scene after scene to an amazing payoff. But the players need to at least want to get on the ride. So what does this crazy nobody, the Malkavian vampire called Brother Bernardus from the back cover, want you to do? Just a simple task. Go and destroy some Infernalists. The text makes it clear that Bernardus is not at all there, and likely a paranoid schizophrenic, which many modern players will know the signs of and assume this means the Infernalists stealing from and spying on him constantly are probably delusions. The writer even points out that this is a poorly conceived ruse, so it gets harder to justify why the coterie would humor him and risk their eternal unlives to help. To be absolutely clear, in Vampire, Infernalists are vampires, humans, or some other type of being that sold their soul to the devil, the literal devil, and have decided to serve hell in order to get something they wanted out of the deal. And this adventure assumes that new characters would want to go fight people like that for a delusional hobo. Since we're doing a module review and have no choice but to get on this train, let's go looking for these Infernalists. The module starts this section by insulting our intelligence again. This adventure really hypes up the threat of the city descending into bloody madness, which would be a wild adventure, and completely does not back it up by showing anything like that happening. Until after the adventure is over, there are no signs of anything anywhere of that sort of thing happening in-game. The coterie are led to a stable on the edge of town where 3 sinister vampires are about to sacrifice a 4th vampire in an evil ritual. This will end in violence, as the ritualists know they're not supposed to be doing this. What they're doing is illegal in vampire society, and if the coterie doesn't attack, the ritualists will. So a fight will happen because the writer says so, and nothing the writer didn't think of is allowed. And assuming the coterie wins, they find out that the, quote, Infernalists, unquote, were in fact members of the Tremere, a clan of vampire wizards who made themselves undead by devouring the founder of Clan Salubri, a clan of healers and demon hunters. It's a complicated and fascinating vampire metaplot, but believe me when I say the Tremere are not much better than Infernalists at all. Once the fight is over and all the ritualists have been killed or escaped, the characters can take a look around and see what they have wrought. The symbols inscribed on the floor seem to indicate to characters with arcane knowledge that the combatants were performing the ritual of the Bitter Rose, allowing many vampires to diablerize a single target. And diablerize, that is the draining of all the blood out of another vampire, including whatever's left of their soul or what substitutes for it. That way they can absorb their power. Perhaps these were, after all, Infernalists. However, beneath the shroud, the characters discover an unconscious woman with a barely visible third eye upon her forehead. The woman is in fact Aisha bint Wahiba, and she gets her own sidebar. The Infernalists were Tremere. If the coterie has a Tremere in their midst, he should be able to imagine quite vividly the repercussions that will be coming down upon them for interrupting the ritual and slaying the other members of his clan. There is nowhere to run. There is nowhere to hide. Even bringing the Salubri to the local Tremere chantry won't appease the wrath sure to descend from above. The implications are tremendous, and the characters have only one friend in the city, Brother Bernardus. The character should be encouraged to return to the broken down house and speak with Bernardus. For if the local Tremere find the newcomers first, they will certainly be destroyed without pity or remorse. Here the adventure makes a case that just isn't true. For context, the Tremere clan is highly organized and hierarchical, and they will destroy members who disobey their superiors. The 3 Tremere were supposed to be gone from Jerusalem, so they lied to a superior. They didn't have her permission to do this. The coterie does have plenty of places to run and hide. So it sets up a false threat situation that Bernardus is their only friend when he's obviously not their friend because he set them up. And how would the Tremere leader, known as Mara, who doesn't even appear in this adventure, showing how empty a threat she is, even know this happened? More basically, why would newbie vampires even know that these are Tremere? They don't wear company logos. The only clan with the power to detect clan membership is the Tremere. So we're only in Act 1, and already the writer seems to be thinking that she's telling a story, but that, in fact, she's not. What she thinks is coming across is not the story that your players are going to be encountering. And I have a couple more problems with Act 1. The victim, Aisha, she serves absolutely no role in this story at all. According to her write-up, she has powerful patrons from the Lasombra clan protecting her, and why did Bernardus not ask them for help? For that matter, Jerusalem's vampires are ruled by a prince, so why didn't Bernardus go to the prince? The foul Tremere kidnapped with the intent to devour one of his subjects. That's kind of his job to stop that sort of thing. Hey, critical thinker, don't go asking questions like that. We have a train to move along. No, I am not done here because so little of this makes sense. What the Tremere were trying to do is pull off the ritual of the Bitter Rose, like we talked about, which is an incredibly closely guarded secret of Clan Tremere, but the module says the PCs can easily recognize it. That doesn't make any sense, starting with the fact that these flunkies had the ritual in the first place, that the coterie would have any clue what the ritual would even do, to the impossibility that they would know the name of this ultra-secret ritual. Frankly, this entire scene did not need to be here. As we go through the rest of the adventure, you'll see how he could have skipped this whole act and not lost anything important to the story. Which brings us to Act 2. So with the contrived problem of the coterie being in trouble with a local Tremere leader who doesn't even appear in this adventure, Bernardus acts like the coterie are at his mercy, because only he can protect the characters from an NPC who has no way of knowing the PCs did anything. Just so you know this isn't my imagination, here's a sidebar entitled Caught. Now the trap has been sprung. The characters have been brought to the city in order to handle the rogue vampire, a creature who only responds to the word 5, not to deal with so-called infernalists. Bernardus set up the attack on the Tremere ritual, knowing that the characters would accept the job. He warned the Tremere ahead of time that their ritual was going to be disrupted and made sure the characters would be spotted on approach. Now if the vampires do not do as he asks, he'll turn them over. Confident that the Tremere will never suspect his own involvement in the affair, he did, after all, warn them. If the characters suspect that Bernardus has set them up, they'll have to go through a great deal of trouble to prove it. And by wasting that time, they are allowing the Tremere time to hunt them down. If the characters leave the city, the Tremere will find them. If they are particularly unsuccessful, or if they refuse, Bernardus will simply tell the Tremere immediately. Wise characters will realize that they have been set up and will comply for the moment, saving revenge for another night. If the characters kill Bernardus, both the Tremere and any allies Bernardus possessed will begin looking for the characters, intent on bloody revenge. This whole sidebar is a stupid gotcha. Bernardus warned the dead Tremere, not Mara, who he didn't tell, and instead concealed info from, which also means he somehow found out the Tremere were doing the ritual of the Bitter Rose in the first place. And exactly what allies are going to hunt the players down? Bernardus doesn't have any. In neither this module nor the Jerusalem by Night book is it ever argued he knows anyone who gives a damn about him. As a matter of fact, the books say that in the years after this adventure ends, he gets put down by a couple no-name Ravnos who tired of him spooking their horses in their stable. In Act 2, Bernardus asks the coterie to find a previously unknown vampire in the city that is causing trouble. The Nosferatu want to kill the newcomer, but Bernardus doesn't want that to happen. Once again, the writer tells us the characters have no choice but to go along with it, which is obviously not true. The coterie is sent to meet a Nosferatu in disguise called Ranulf. Described as a selfish coward who doesn't care about the rest of his clan, the writer makes sure to tell us if the coterie messes with Ranulf, his entire clan will come after them because they're so loyal to each other. What the hell is this? How does this make any sense? Ranulf leads the coterie to a small ruined church to wait for the mysterious vampire known as 5, because every time he shows up, that's what he screams. Out of nowhere, Ranulf tells the coterie, here is the place that the Crusaders first went mad, referring to the slaughter that took place in Jerusalem following the First Crusade capturing the city, in which Ranulf has very little chance of knowing, so the writer is just again ham-fisting details into the narrative. Ranulf wasn't there, and those who were got murdered, so who told him this detail? 5 shows up clad in century-old Crusader garb that identifies him as a Knight of the Lily. He screams 5 and Requiesco several times before babbling about rivers of blood, the dead child he ate, his 4 companions, and more. He'll try and noticeably fail to mentally contact a character, and heaven help the player if they try to link minds in turn. The horrors they will experience culminate in a vision of 4 other men crawling and screaming as 5 drains a young man of all his blood, and his body crumbles to ash. At this point, an Asmite comes out of the shadows and assassinates 5, and the module assumes he succeeds, making no provisions for the coterie stopping him. This Muslim vampire assassin is Rashid ibn Musafir, a character with power straight from Plot Convenience Playhouse. Rashid ran away from the bloodbath 100 years ago and hid outside of town, and he is keen to slay any who may have been involved in those war crimes. At this point, Rashid escapes using his plot armor for now, because he'll need to show up later, and the party gets its freedom to choose which way to go. Going back to Ranulf for more information is possible, but the module unhelpfully splits what he has to say over Acts 2 and 3. It turns out that he also sold the info on 5's location to Rashid, which is why he showed up to the party. There is this exciting sidebar about the Malkavian clan founder known as Malkov, about how when 5 dies, Malkov's soul cries out beneath the city, and a well in the city starts to flow red with his blood. Any Malkavian characters in the coterie are psychologically tormented, but I find the application is too limited to only Malkavians. A vampire clan found or raging nearby should affect anybody with heightened or supernatural senses, such as those with the disciplined auspex or those already touched with mental derangements. Bernardus is now a wealth of exposition and advice, probably because he's being possessed by Malkov and not really himself at the moment. Bernardus stands at the window, a thin trail of blood drying on his cheek as he holds the cloak of the dead man. In the shadows of the house, you hear faint creaks as his servants move past, wishing to comfort their master in his sorrow, but unable to be of service. Nearly 100 years ago, the Malkavian says, astonishingly lucid, the First Crusade swept through Jerusalem. The man you found tonight was one of the few survivors, though lost forever in the deepest caverns beneath the city. He was one of our kind, sane and rational, on the day I saw him last. He and 4 others participated in the slaughter, and then vanished into the depths, screaming for more blood. Since that day, no man has seen or heard them. My clanmates and I would search for them, but are forbidden by ancient oath from entering the deepest labyrinth below the city. Even the Nosferatu speak of dangers that they will not face that dwell in those tunnels and ruins. Yet this man, this strange madman, survived beneath Jerusalem for 100 years and more. Something sustained him. On the day that Jerusalem was destroyed by the Crusade, I stood outside its walls, forbidden by my sire from entering. It was all that saved me. The weeks of blood would have overwhelmed me otherwise. It is said that the holy springs ran scarlet with blood, and that these 5 men were seen from time to time as they emerged from the caverns, screaming before being lost to time. At this point, Malkavians need to make a willpower roll or be stricken with eerie visions and roiling emotions beyond their control. Other characters will sense the presence of an ancient mind brushing against their own, which is good flavor text for this encounter. Malkov in Bernardus asks him to find and free the remaining 4 Knights of the Lily from their madness, and in exchange he will deliver on all the promises he previously made and allow one of them to diablerize him, drink him dry, kill him forever, and possibly making the drinker's generation lower, another term for increasing their vampiric potency. This is a terrible offer, as diablerie is condemned by vampiric society in the Dark Ages and in the majority of vampiric society in the modern day. It would be like a person offering to pay you by letting you murder and eat them. That should morally repulse you, as it would most players going through this adventure. The writer also points out that the coterie is free to leave and not do what Malkov as Bernardus requests, but they will be haunted and develop melancholia, which will drive them into a suicidal gloom. And don't forget, all those Tremere who don't know your characters killed the ritualists, who lied to conceal their location and activities from the clan, will somehow still be out to get you. Seriously! The writer says wise characters will accept this because they have so much to gain and nothing to lose. The same writer who went to great pains earlier to tell us Bernardus obviously can't deliver on any of his promises, and they will be supernaturally marked as diablerists, and so marked for death if they take him up on his offer. The same writer who is sending the coterie of starting characters after an evil vampire god and band of mad vampires beneath Jerusalem. Did she even read what she wrote? This had an editor, so somebody else read this and said, "This looks good." Editor John Chambers should be tarred and feathered. Moving on to Act 3, this is the investigation phase of the module, and the best part of the adventure, where the coterie has both freedom of movement and a variety of interesting locations to visit and NPCs to talk to. If the coterie speaks with Ranulf, he can offer good leads, and there are a number of mostly mortal NPCs that can help piece together clues about the Knights of the Lily. There's an apothecary, a half-blind mad prophet in his pathetic home life, a crusader by the name Jürgen Gerhardt, who shows up later in the much better written adventure Under the Black Cross. There are also Cappadocian vampires haunting a graveyard as they do, and then there's Adonijah, the most interesting NPC in the module. Adonijah is ancient, wrinkled, and tired, with deep-set sparkling brown eyes beneath sparse white eyebrows. The coterie finds him outside the city in a quiet, peaceful place filled with the echoes of long-ago things that have since been lost to the outside world. Although he looks like nothing more than a poor and old human, if they attack him, they risk utter annihilation. He has witnessed displays of power unknown since the time of ancient legends, and has been friend to all but gods. One of those godlike beings he befriended was Malkov, who he knows by a different name, and the last time they saw each other was in the time of King David, the one from the Bible, over 1,000 years before this adventure takes place. Adonijah is key to this adventure because he has remained in Jerusalem to keep tabs on the slumbering but still alert Malkov, and he has the key to stopping a repeat the weeks of blood. From a well in the city, he has collected several drops of Malkov's blood, and if the coterie finds the missing knights and gives them each one drop, then Malkov's soul can be reunited and disaster avoided. It mentions that Adonijah can give the coterie a map to help out, but there is no accompanying illustration, which brings up a sore spot for the module. One thing it doesn't give us is a useful map. There are maps in here, but they don't mark key locations for the adventure, which is important in an adventure involving so much moving around. I bring this up because understanding the logistics is a problem. Vampires can only be active at night, so time is at a premium. But at no point are we told how long it takes to get from one place to the next, if they're close together or far apart, if there are sectarian checkpoints they have to get through, or anything like that. So I made my own. Which takes us to Act 4, the Byzantine Ruins. And this part oozes with flavor. The caverns beneath the city are damp and slippery, marred by numerous cave-ins and twisting passages. In some places, it is obvious that the walls were once worked stone, but for the most part collapses and fallen entryways make for a dangerously rough passage. The tunnels were abandoned long before Jerusalem expanded over them, and many of the once solid caverns are now crumbling and worn. The labyrinth is nearly impassable in places, with tall stone arches leading to cliffside drops extend down into utter darkness. A series of feeble streams run through the caverns at irregular intervals, making echoes that haunt each step. Rats, beetles, and other subterranean creatures run through the passages. In places, the balance holding a stone passageway open may be as fragile as a bone. A single jarring impact, and a huge section of the corridor will fall. It is a dangerous place and not one to be explored lightly. The passages weave in 3 dimensions, and there are many layers of structure beneath the first. One could truly wander here for eternity, feeding on rats and the blood of blind fish, and never again see the world. While that is great flavor text, 2 paragraphs down it says, it's impossible to map the ruins. Really? In the real world, most ruins aren't that big, and the Byzantine era of rule in Jerusalem wasn't that long ago, so how are they really unmappable? A plethora of fantasy adventure games manage to map all kinds of labyrinths and crazy locations, but it's too hard to map ruins built by a technically proficient society. Or did the writer Ree Soesbee not know how to map it, and this is a cop-out? I'd bet my money on that. Basic elements of adventure design that every D&D related publisher does as a basic part of the job, White Wolf always struggled at. They wrote amazing setting material, but in general couldn't write an adventure to save their life. Given the danger overtly described in the flavor text, I would have loved a scene or trap where one or more PCs gets buried in the collapsing ruins and has to be dug out to heighten the sepulchral mood of the act. But we don't really get that. Since we don't have a map or random encounters, this act revolves around 3 locations. The Cappadocian tomb entrance with a lot of beetles inexplicably trudging about. There's a sidebar saying the PCs cannot communicate with the bugs no matter what, even if they use animalism, a vampiric power that centers around doing that exact thing. Well, why not? Because these beetles are insect servants of the infernalist Bali clan, who show up in Act 5 and who are using them to search for Malkov's torpid body. The same Bali who don't have animalism to actually command the beetles to do anything. Not one of them. This is a missed opportunity to build foreshadowing because PCs with animalism could receive cryptic and disturbing messages from the beetles. Also, players don't like it when their powers arbitrarily don't work like they do here. Next, we have the Room of Scrawlings, which has not only clues but can give permanent derangements from the madness baked into the place. It is effectively here to confirm the coterie is on the right trail, but it locks away some spectacularly horrific flavor text behind a specific power use and die roll. I would simply give it to the vampire with the highest perception or aspect score. Finally, we come to the River of Blood, where the coterie can not only fall into a "you're completely screwed" trap, but also find a Knight of the Lily known as One. The trap is an underground river you have to cross to reach the lone babbling knight. Assigns a strength plus athletics roll to see if you cross it, and if you fail the roll, the book describes how, if you're lucky, you wash out into the Dead Sea a month later, and if you're unlucky, you're trapped in underground darkness forever. While I did ask for a trap to be down here, not one that screws a character so completely as this. If you fail one swimming roll, you're completely done for? That doesn't seem right to me. If Ranulf helped the coterie find the ruins or navigate them, he also sold their mission out to Rashid, who now shows up to kill One and any PC that tries to stop him. Rashid can use his plot armor to cross the river without fear of being washed into destination fucked, which is again unfair to the players. If they have to make the roll, so should he. Hopefully the coterie keeps One alive and gets to hear his story, because boy, howdy. The full text is worth reading, but to give you a taste, he babbles of bugs and terror, black crawling things that screamed for his soul. His men, he claims, are lost to the devils in the abbey and to their black bugs. He tells of the darkness that overcame the Crusaders, of watching himself do horrible things to men and women within the city walls. The Crusaders are not acting on orders, he swears, or even their own volition. Some greater power usurped their minds and had driven them to the madness that made the blood run thick in the streets. He paints vivid images of slaughter and bloodshed, of watching the vitae of innocents drip down between cracks in the city streets, of burning buildings filled with inhabitants, of watching the flames roar higher than the city walls. Summarizing the rest of it, effectively Malkov's malignant spirit was possessing his most beloved vampiric child, and through him reveling and watching the atrocities going on above ground, while also using his godlike powers of madness to fuel the slaughter and bloodlust of the Crusaders into massacring everyone, including their fellow Christians. It is fitting that Malkov was so distracted by the violence he ginned up that he failed to notice when the 5 vampires of the Knights of the Lily found his possessed child and diablerized him, with the knight known as 5 devouring his child's soul and part of his. Getting exactly the kind of payback he deserved, part of Malkov's soul was thus trapped inside of the Knights, and losing part of himself has been driving the vampire demigod mad ever since. However things go with Rashid and 1, a key moment happens here. If 1 is redeemed by feeding him a drop of Malkov's blood, the soul fragment trapped inside of him flies free, returning to Malkov and returning 1 to his senses. Telling the coterie that his name is Montfrey de Lyonesse, he will have no knowledge of the century of torment he has just been through, the slate wiped clean. If 1 is destroyed, the earth shakes, the river flows with tainted, clotted blood that can devour any character in it, and the tormented visions of the last several days flood the coterie's minds. Malkov has permanently lost part of his soul. Either way events unfold, the coterie should have the clues to guide them through the underground to find the rest of the knights in Act 5, the Abbey of Mount Zion. The flavor text that starts off the 2.5 pages of this act told me how much of a missed opportunity this adventure really was. The labyrinthine caverns beneath Jerusalem lead eventually to the Abbey of Mount Zion, a cold, secluded place on the swelling hilltop above Jerusalem. The Abbey has long stood as an impenetrable bastion of faith, but that's not the side of the Abbey which the characters are about to witness. The monks and scholars of the Abbey were once holy men, confined by their scriptures and books to a life of contemplation. Left alone by the Muslim authorities, they kept to their own devices, at least until the first of the Bali infiltrators arrived. For 20 years now, agents of the Infernal have wormed their way within the Abbey walls, leading the monks down a twisted path to dark sacrifice and animalistic worship of darker powers. Even now, deep beneath the Abbey's virtuous outer face, the foulness of the Bali corrupts the city. Their monks travel through the streets, stealing young children for their foul purposes, and laying traps for Canaanites who might oppose them. Beneath the Abbey, 3 captured men writhe in agony, infested with insects and tortured by the lost shards of Malkov's mind. Where has this adventure waiting to happen been hiding this whole time? Instead of taking the time to build up these corrupting Bali and their wicked monastery to be as horrifying as that flavor text said it was, we get a tacked-on fight in a basement that completely bypasses the atrocities in the monastery above. Mount Zion in the real world is a big deal, but this monastery is neither described in this adventure nor in Jerusalem by Night. Given the religious focus of the Vampire of the Dark Ages setting, this evil monastery could have been a signature adventure location, a hallmark adventure like the Tomb of Horrors or White Plume Mountain was for D&D. But no, we get a fight in one room in a basement. The coterie enters the basement through a living curtain of maggots. Think of how memorable the rest of the place could have been after hearing that one detail, a living curtain of maggots that you have to walk through. Arriving here will result in an instant fight with the 3 Bali in here torturing the remaining knights in a variety of creative ways. While the Bali do have names and write-ups, it's a complete waste of time to care, because there's no reason the coterie will ever learn any of it. These masterminds who corrupted a sacred monastery at such a key location are completely wasted on a simple brawl. If the coterie defeats the Bali in a fight to the death, they could gather that they were trying to decipher the greater meaning of the 4 words the knights kept shouting, not knowing there was a missing 5th word. When the coterie finally puts it all together, we are rewarded with a heaping pile of what the fuck. A riddle that is basically unsolvable and unlikely to deliver any satisfaction value to the players. Changeling, the dreaming players might think they know what it means, but we have no verification of the truth. From here, the module envisions 4 ways this could shake out. 1. The coterie frees the remaining knights by giving them a drop of Malkov's blood. At last relieved of their madness and eager to get back to their unlives, the knights walk with the coterie out of the catacombs and immediately crumble into dust. Wait, what? immediately Why does that happen, you might ask? That would be a great question, because this isn't Indiana Jones 3. This makes absolutely no sense. They were already outside the ruins beneath the Abbey, so why did they not die then? 5 kept showing up all over town and didn't crumble to dust when he stepped outside. The module never stated there was something special about the ruins keeping them going, and in fact pointed out that they had sources of blood available to keep their hunger sated down there. I would ditch this stupid idea and have the knights offer to serve the coterie as loyal vassals, out of gratitude for saving them from an eternity of mind-breaking torture and being murdered by Satanists. 2, it suggests the coterie kills the knights and drinks Malkov's blood for themselves. Turns out that won't be a good plan, as the PCs simply take the knights' places as raving lunatics caught in Malkov's endlessly looping psychoses. 3 is an odd scenario where the coterie takes the knights out of the catacombs at a place Bernardus' ghouls, Tim and Paul, are waiting for them. Quote, because they just knew, end quote. Plot convenience playhouse style. While the book doesn't spell this out, I imagine the scenario requires the coterie to have not given the knights Malkov's blood because they don't crumble to dust when they leave. Which again, why? For some reason, Tim and Paul insist on taking the knights with them, and without the players following, to do what exactly is never stated. What else would Bernardus do with them? He's possessed by Malkov, who wants them freed. And of course, Bernardus himself reneges on all his offers and runs to ground, setting traps and the like for the players along the way, and blah, blah, blah. Why are we still pretending Bernardus is capable of doing anything worth a flip? He's been a loser this entire module. The only time he wasn't was when he was possessed, and now I have to read some tripe about how he's so much smarter and ahead of the players, etc. Screw off. Option 4 has the players killing off the knights and not drinking Malkov's blood. I have no idea what kind of murder hobo would kill off the knights, not follow the instructions to successfully end the scenario, and still not drink the antediluvian blood they have on hand. If this incredibly unlikely scenario comes to pass, there are interesting developments that can come of it, but it's just one plot hammer after another, because you will do what the writer said or else, even after the adventure's over. Ultimately, if any portion of Malkov's soul is not freed, the madness and violence the module kept hinting at but never did anything with bubbles and froths until it explodes. You know, when it's already outside of the writer's responsibility to detail it and to make it happen for you and the product you paid them for, where they said they were going to do that. Open violence grips the city, atrocities are committed by the most unexpected people, and Jerusalem endures a second week of blood. Now you might be asking, if all portions of Malkov's soul have to be freed to avoid this, and we saw 5 murdered right in front of us, doesn't that mean the city's doomed regardless of what we do? Shut up, critical thinker! Because having written herself into a corner, the writer handwaves that fact by saying Adonijah somehow finds a way to deal with it. If Malkov's soul is freed, the tensions we were told about but never saw relax. Bernardus flees, Adonijah owes the party a solid and will return when they need help the most. The Bali's power is broken, except that it isn't, because there were still Bali in the Abbey that wasn't detailed, and they're still very capable of doing very bad things. Rainulf inexplicably runs away, and he will go to great pains to hide from the coterie for not a lot of reason. The guy was a snake. He was always a snake. He sold information to Rashid just like he sold information to the coterie. This only became a problem if the coterie decided to pick a fight. Why would he uproot his unlife over this? And didn't the writer earlier say that if the coterie messed with him, the entire Nosferatu clan would go after them? Did she suddenly decide that no longer applied? Oh, wait, no. She points it out right here that they still will. What the hell, Ree? Needless to say, these follow-on plot ideas don't impress me. The module finishes with a write-up on Malkov's blood. The blood in the vial has marvelous properties. Swallowing a single drop restores a Cainite's entire blood pool and can permanently cure all derangements, save the final one possessed by a Malkavian, all wounds and all ailments. In addition, the lucky soul who drinks the blood gains a point of permanent willpower and drops a single generation. A mortal drinking a drop of Malkov's blood becomes Gould, but does not require blood except on an annual basis to maintain his state. Storytellers should note that these are the effects of these particular drops of Malkov's blood and not the effects of every drop of every antediluvian's vitae. Even in his slumber and torment, Malkov breaks all the rules. What the fuck? There are no published rules about drinking 3rd gen blood. How is this breaking them? And if someone decides to not drink the blood, but instead keep it like a pet, we get these plot hammers. Should the characters decide to take Malkov's blood with them and leave the city, the consequences should be dire. Somehow, some way, word of what they are carrying will spread to every Malkavian along the route, and few of those worthies will take kindly to having their clan founder's blood toted off by strangers. As word spreads, no doubt Tremere, anxious to experiment with the stuff, will find out and make their best attempts to snatch or bargain for it. The concentrated foulness that is in antediluvian's blood may draw other monsters out of the darkness, intent on destroying it or using it for their own purposes. Lupines, in particular, may not take kindly to its passage across their lands. And blood calls to blood, and wherever the vitae is taken, madness and sorrow will follow, as surely as dusk follows day. And that concludes the adventure. Now here's how I have and would fix the glaring problems with this adventure. Starting with the unfulfilled premise of the module that the Week of Blood is making a comeback, and violence is on the rise as it gets closer to the point of no return. Put that on screen. Show your players violence in the streets. Show them gang fights of Latins versus Armenians versus Jews versus Muslims. Let them smell the blood in the air, making it hard for the coterie to not frenzy out of hunger. When the traveling players arrive at the city walls, they find mortals and Canaanites alike, just on the inside, are given to frenzy and violence. Wise vampires have bolted themselves inside their havens, if they're lucky enough to have one, while the unwise and unlucky are stuck roaming the streets, trying to survive and scuttling into the shadows before the break of day. Some brave mortals like Jürgen Gerhard and the holy people of the city see the open vampiric menace and start pulling them out of their holes to set fire to them in the sun and guard their churches and synagogues by night. The Bali are far enough away to not be influenced by this, but they can clearly see that something's going on and probably trying to take advantage of it. And they also know that this madness is somehow tied to the Knights of the Lily in their possession, but they don't understand quite why yet. The Tremere leader Mara holds up in her chantry outside of town, watching the chaos from afar. The three ritualists that took advantage of the chaos to snatch Aisha from her haven were only able to do so because the hospital guards and the patients themselves were out of control. Anti-Crusader terrorist vampires like Rashid commit mass embraces and send the hunger-mad neonates rampaging through the city's streets, howling for Crusader blood and creating chaos. When the players are waiting for Five to appear, have these terrorists surround the coterie, asking if they are servants of the Crusader usurpers, despoiling the land. Distracted as the coterie will be by this bloodthirsty band of terrorists, just waiting for them to give the wrong answer to spring upon them, that's when Rashid jumps out and can kill Five with no opposition because their eyes were not on him. Seeing the old Crusader struck down, the terrorists can tell the players, such is the fate of these despoilers, and be on their way. The players can have a brush with almost certain final death, but it's only there for atmosphere. The prince's palace is under heavy guard, and he is barely keeping it together himself. So he'll be of no help to the coterie, as his guards won't even let him in to see him. Since the local vampire court is fortified and not taking visitors, Bernardus can entice the players into working with him by pointing out the dangers of being within the city walls and offering them shelter in his decrepit mansion outside. He can also promise to vouch for them with the prince or his agents if they fall afoul of him in the future. Make Rainulf the only vampire within the city walls that's still mostly sane and willing to move through the streets of rage, since he sees an unfilled need, is willing to take the risks, and willing to reap the rewards. Instead of being hunted down by the player characters during the investigation phase of the adventure, the half-blind prophet can instead find them at one of the sites they're supposed to investigate, and there give them his message. Since the module says that he knows that he was always fated to die in Jerusalem, he can tell the coterie his message, and then immediately be set upon by a pack of wild vampires, hungry for blood, thus fulfilling the prophecy, and which should scare the shit out of your players while giving them time to run away. Speaking of all those different factions and characters, one thing seriously lacking in this module is a staple of vampire material, the Prince's Court. Social interactions and relationships are critical parts of the vampire game, and those are not considered at all in this module, so it suffers for it. This module is intended to support the Jerusalem by Night setting, but it's almost written as though that book didn't exist. While it isn't the best setting for the vampire of the Dark Ages, that would be Constantinople by Night, which was so well written it both warped and inspired me for life. The changes I suggest allow weaving many of the important characters from that book into this adventure and sets up the coterie for exciting possibilities once they head off the Week of Blood. The dust starts to settle in the city, and the factions get to fighting over what the new status quo is going to be. Frankly, this module is about Malkov's folly in returning the pieces he lost of his soul. Itself an intriguing concept because it's not quite clear during any of the vampire material that vampires in fact still have souls after they're embraced. So this module should be rewritten to focus just on that. The entire Tremere and Salubri opening act should be axed. Yes, it is signature Vampire of the Dark Ages material, but it would have been better suited to an adventure of its own, instead of being a complete non sequitur in this one. It had nothing to do with Malkov, it led nowhere, and that word count could have been used to expand on the Abbey in Act 5, which reeked of amazing potential. Were I to rewrite the adventure from the ground up, it would go like this. Act 1, terror in the streets and the search for 5. Act 2, into the catacombs and the river of blood. And Act 3, into the Devil's Monastery. You might be saying, Stephen, there's nothing stopping you from doing that right now. Because once you buy a module, whatever you do with it's up to you. While that is correct, I am sick and tired of buying half-literate, poorly written crap from other people that I have to completely rework to make worth a damn. I could have just saved the money and written an adventure on my own, and not have to rework somebody else's D-grade material. Sadly, this type of crap was the typical level of quality we got from White Wolf Adventures back in the day. I haven't read more recent World of Darkness adventures, but there are reasons you don't hear about fantastic, awe-inspiring modules from the old World of Darkness, or hear about this or that golden oldie adventure from Vampire, because they were generally awful. There were some very good ones, and I'll eventually review them, but even they usually have serious flaws that you need to address in order to make them really work. So who do I have to blame for this 32-page crapfest? The module lists Ree Soesbee as the main writer, with several contributors. Without knowing who did what specifically, I'm going to blame Soesbee and the editor, John Chambers. And Ree accepted the author byline, so she gets the dental exam. So who is Ree Soesbee? According to her website, looks like she's been very successful in getting work in the RPG hobby. While my only exposure to her has been this module, it looks like a lot of people enjoy what she does, at least enough to keep giving her work. Her Wikipedia entry shows a lengthy rap sheet of works, but for some reason doesn't mention this module. She's gotten to work on legacy fantasy lines any RPG writer would be jealous of, like Dragonlance, Legend of the Five Rings, and also an MMORPG, Guild Wars. Having only heard the name of that game before, I looked into how big a deal Guild Wars is these days and saw that an estimated 350,000 or so people still play it every month, 10 years after Guild Wars 2 was released. Congrats, Ree, because by every indication, it looks as though she's had a successful career in the RPG industry and a hobby that she no doubt loves. But this module is proof that nobody is perfect all the time. Speaking of imperfections, the art. Let's talk about the art. Looks like there were 6 different artists in the book, and that gives me cause for pause, because with that many artists, that means we're not going to get a coherent story told by the visuals. The front cover art was awesome, really drew me in from the bookshelf, but it is nothing you get to experience in-game. That was maybe for some of the NPCs a long time ago. The adventure promised by the book cover looks exciting, but that's not the adventure on the inside. Now that I'm looking at the cover, we didn't get fountains spewing bright crimson either. We got a stream coming out of a well that occasionally spotted blood. The back cover art does match the main story of Malkov torturing people's minds, so that one does fit what we got. The interior art was meh. They didn't cover the interesting parts of the module, instead giving us landscapes like this, or empty tombs like that, which should have been crawling with beetles, unless you claim those indistinguishable dark smudges are beetles. A lot of the interior art looks recycled from the Jerusalem by Night book, and it had problems then, such as being inaccurate. The sacrifice victim Aisha is a Salubri, a clan known for having a third eye on their foreheads, kind of hard to miss. Now it is possible to be a Salubri without having one, but once a Salubri earns a second level in the Valorant discipline, they get one. No ifs, ands, or buts. Hell, anybody that earns a second level of Valorant gets a third eye. Aisha has a 4 in Valorant, so she would definitely have one. But do you see a third eye? No, you don't. And that's sloppy work. Speaking of sloppy work, the drive-thru RPG listing to buy the module doesn't even have the full back cover blurb like they normally do. And they didn't even bother to clean up text mess you see in the description you do get. Now, I'm not about to leave this review on a down note, because a Vampire Podcast I've listened to for years, probably every single episode that they've done, have reviewed this module and every other old World of Darkness module and setting book and every other type of book that was ever put out. 25 years of Vampire the Masquerade Podcast features incredibly insightful and experienced World of Darkness storytellers and players that really shovel food for thought, how any given book fits into the wider game context, and tons of good jokes. The only downside of their website is that episodes are not really searchable, so I included a Spotify link to their episode on this adventure in the description below. So I hope you enjoyed this review and my harangue on the Vampire of the Dark Ages adventure module, Fountains of Bright Crimson. I would love to hear your thoughts, so please drop them in the comments below. And if you enjoyed yourself, I do enjoy people liking and subscribing, and I thank you for your time, that you chose to spend it with me. So as we, dear friends, part for now, I wish you nothing but the best.